We are now going to look at the third unit or the third topic in principles of costing. The third topic talks about cost behavior. We recall that in chapter number 2, we had looked at cost classification. When we classify costs, we looked at number 1, elements of costs. Number 2, we looked at nature of costs. Number 3, we looked at function of costs. And now we are looking at focusing on behavior of costs. In chapter 2, unit 2, under behavior of costs, we saw that there are 4 types of costs. Number 1, we have what we call fixed costs. Number 2, variable costs. Number 3, semi-variable costs. And lastly, stepped costs. So in our today's unit, we are going to focus on cost behavior. Now, what is cost behavior? Cost behavior refers to the change in cost, either an increase or decrease as output level changes. In other words, when we change the activity level, the units you are producing, what is the effect of change in activity level on the cost the business incurs? There are some relationships where when the activity increases, cost is increasing, or when activity increases, cost is decreasing. This reaction of cost to change in activity is what we call cost behavior. There are 4 types of cost behavior. The first type of cost is called a fixed cost. In chapter 2, we defined fixed cost. Fixed cost as a cost that is constant throughout the activity level. So if we have activity in our diagram here, if the x-axis represents activity and our y-axis represents cost, a fixed cost is a cost that does not change. It remains constant. So it remains constant. Whether you produce 0 units, 10 units, 20 units, or even 50 units, the cost remains the same. For example, rent. Rent will not change with the number of students in a class. Rent will not change with the number of units you are producing. So a fixed cost is a cost that remains constant. However, that is total cost. When we come to what is called fixed cost per unit, fixed cost per unit is not constant. For example, if we go back to our chart, and here in the x-axis we have activity, now in the y-axis we have cost per unit. For example, if our activities are 10, 20, 30, or even 40, and our fixed cost in this case was maybe 10,000 Rwandese francs. When you produce 0 units, the fixed cost remains as 10,000. But as we produce 10 units, the fixed cost will now change from, it will change 10,000 divided by 10. The fixed cost per unit will be 1,000. So in this case, if we have our values in the y-axis, just like in the x-axis, when you produce 10 units, the fixed cost per unit is 1,000. When you produce 20 units, the fixed cost per unit changes to 10,000 divided by 20, and that gives you 500. And that keeps on changing as you produce more units. For example, the third one, if you produce 30 units, the fixed cost per unit becomes 333.33. As we produce more units, the fixed cost per unit comes down. So for example, if this is 20 or 200, this is 400, 600, 800, or even 1,000. When you produce 10 units, the fixed cost per unit is somewhere there. When you produce 20 units, it's 500. 500 is averagely there. When you produce 30 units, it's 33. So it's roughly there. And when you produce 40, it changes to 25. 25 comes to somewhere like that. When you produce 50, it comes to that. So that means that the fixed cost per unit is a curve. Fixed cost per unit is a curve. It is not constant. That is number one, fixed cost per unit. So in our fixed cost per unit, that's the illustration of our fixed cost per unit. Okay. Our next cost now, we have looked at fixed cost and we have concluded that fixed cost is constant throughout the activity level. Our second type of cost is called variable cost. In chapter 2, we defined variable cost as a cost that changes with a change in activity. A cost that changes with a change in activity, which means as the activity level increases, the cost also goes up. So when we start from point 0, as we increase the activity, the cost also increases. That is an example of variable cost. But variable cost per unit does not increase. Variable cost per unit remains constant. We'll come back to that. The next type of cost is called semi-variable cost. Now, in chapter 2, again, we looked at semi-variable cost and we defined it as a cost that is both fixed and variable. A cost that has got a part that is fixed and a part that is variable. Let's look at our illustration in this case. If this is the activity level and this is the total cost, remember total cost starts from point 0. So if, for example, we have a value of 1,000 in this case, it means that when you produce 0 units, the cost is 1,000. And then the cost starts increasing above 1,000 as the activity level increases. So which means the minimum cost we can incur in this case is 1,000. But as you produce more, the cost goes above the 1,000. So in our illustration, from 0 to 1,000, that is fixed cost. So this component is fixed cost. But as you increase the units, the variable now starts from point 1,000. So maybe if you produce 10 units, you'll be paying 1,100. When you produce 20 units, 1,200. 30 units, 1,300, like that, until it reaches the last activity level. But the point is, the minimum is 1,000. I'm again repeating, semi-variable cost is a cost that is partly fixed and partly variable. For example, a salesperson's salary. When we engage the services of a salesperson to make sales for us, he may be given a retainer. The retainer the salespersons get per month is fixed. But above the retainer, there is a commission the salesperson receives depending on the number of units he sells. Maybe the rent is 100,000. Now, when you sell more, you receive more above the 100,000. But when you sell less, you receive minimum of 100,000. The next type of cost is stepped cost. Now, in a stepped cost, it's a cost that is constant up to a given activity level, beyond which it changes, then remains constant for the next bracket of activity. We defined it in chapter 2, a cost that is constant up to a given activity level, beyond which it changes, then remains constant for the next bracket of activity. We're summarizing 4 types of costs. Number 1, fixed cost. Cost that is constant throughout the activity. Number 2, variable cost. Cost that changes with the change in activity. Number 3, semi-variable cost that is partly fixed and partly variable. And number 4, stepped cost. Cost that is constant up to a given activity level, beyond which it changes, then remains constant for the next activity level. What is the purpose of knowing all these types of costs? These costs enable us to estimate the total cost an organization will spend in order to make a product or offer a service. That therefore leads us to what is called cost estimation. What is cost estimation? Cost estimation involves calculation or forecast of costs at a given level. So you'll be told that if you produce 10 chairs, what is the cost of production of 10 chairs? If you produce 20 chairs, what is the cost of production of 20 chairs? Now, in the process of estimation of costs, trying to know the total cost of making a product or offering a service, there are 4 steps that we normally follow in estimating costs. When you want to estimate costs, there are 4 steps. Step number 1 is to calculate the variable cost per unit. Step number 2 is to calculate the fixed costs. Step number 3 is formulate the total cost equation or formulate the total cost function. And step number 4, it is now the steps that estimates the cost at a given activity level. In order to have a practical example, we are going to focus on 3 examples to enable us estimate total costs. So our first example, which we will follow these 4 steps, is, the question reads, the following relates to ABC Limited, activity level and total cost. So when we produce 200 units, the total cost of production is 7,000. When we produce 300 units, the total cost is 8,000. When we produce 400 units, the total cost is 9,000. Now the requirement is, remember the 4 steps. Step 1, variable cost per unit. Step 2, fixed cost. Step 3, formulate the total cost equation. And step 4, estimate the total cost. Let's start with step 1, which is our first requirement, variable cost per unit. Once we are done with that, we go to step 2, fixed cost. Step 3, formulating the equation. And step 4, requirement 4 and 5, they look at step 4. Step 4 is estimate the total cost. So we want to solve these examples. In that example that we have read, we want to solve it. So when we want to solve that case, whenever you are calculating the variable cost per unit, there is a technique that is called high-low method that is used to calculate the cost. A technique that is called high-low method, we will use it to calculate the total cost. Okay, so our board is now clean. We can now look at variable cost per unit. So when you want to find the variable cost per unit, the formula to use is cost at the highest activity. I'll abbreviate it with highest cost, but this represents cost of the highest activity. And then U minus cost of the lowest activity. I'll call it lowest cost. Divided by highest activity, and then you minus lowest activity. So when you want to get the variable cost per unit, which is our requirement 1, that is what we have. Now we go to the question, and now we identify the highest activity with the corresponding costs. The lowest activity with the corresponding cost. So the highest activity, the cost is 9,000. So we'll come here and have 9,000. The highest activity is 400 units. Minus lowest activity is 200 and the cost is 7,000. So here we'll have 7,000. Here we'll have 200. So this gives us 9,000 minus 7,000. We are left with 2,000 divided by 400 minus 200. That gives you 200. 100. So this gives us a variable cost per unit of 10. So the variable cost will be 10 per unit. That is requirement number 1, which in exams it's 2 marks. Requirement number 2 is to calculate the fixed costs. So when we are getting the fixed costs, requirement number 2 is to calculate the fixed costs. Now there is normally a function that is used that tells us that total cost is equals to variable cost plus fixed cost. In other words, when you want to get the total cost, there are 2 items you look at: variable cost plus fixed cost. Now this variable cost is normally subdivided into 2. Variable cost per unit, and then you multiply by activity. So this variable cost per unit times activity, it gives you variable costs. And then you add fixed costs. In our step 1, we have already calculated the variable cost per unit as 10. And then we have an activity of 400 and the corresponding total cost is 9,000. So we'll come and put it here. If the total cost is 9,000 is equals to, our variable cost per unit does not change. It will be 10 times our activity is 400. When the cost is 9,000, activity is 400. So we have 400. So we'll have that plus fixed cost. Remember, we want to get the fixed cost. So this will be 9,000 is equals to 10 times 400 is 4,000 plus fixed cost. So if you want to get the fixed cost, you make it the subject. So fixed cost will be equals to the total cost of 9,000 minus variable cost of 4,000. And this will therefore give you a fixed cost of 5,000. So our fixed cost is 5,000. The next requirement is formulate the equation. So it will be our third requirement. Formulate the equation. So to get the equation we go back to this. This enables us to formulate the equation. Now, the primary equation is always yx plus c, where y is the total cost, m is the variable cost per unit, x is the activity level, and c is the fixed cost. I'm repeating. The equation y is equal to mx plus c. Y represents the total cost. M represents the variable cost per unit. X represents the activity level. And C represents the fixed cost. Now, if we have y is equals to, we have already calculated the m as 10. And then activity keeps on changing. And then plus our fixed cost, we have calculated as 5,000. So that is what we have as our equation. So in this case, formulate the total cost equation. The equation will be y is equals to 10x plus 5,000. Now with this equation, you can now estimate any cost that you have been asked. For example, you are now being told, calculate the total cost of 350 units. We are going to now step number 3, which is formulation of the total cost equation. We have just looked at it. We have seen our equation is y is equals to, our equation is y is equals to mx plus c, where m is 10, which we had already calculated, and c is 5,000. So with this equation, y is equal to 10x plus 5,000, we can now estimate the total cost of producing 350 units. So if you want to produce 350 units, we have seen the equation is y is equals to 10x plus 5,000. So when producing 350 units, you just replace this x with 350. That will therefore give you y is 10 times 350, and then you add 5,000. So this gives you 3,500 plus 5,000. So the total cost is 8,500. That is y. In other words, when you produce 350 units, the total cost of producing 350 units is that. The last part of that question is number 5. Calculate the total cost of 600 units. So when producing 600 units, we will go back to our equation. Y is equals to 10x plus 5,000. So in that case, we will have 10 times 600 plus 5,000. So this gives us 6,000 plus 5,000. So when you produce 600 units, you will incur a total cost of 11,000. Remember, this is requirement number 5. This is requirement number 4. Requirement number 4. And then we have looked at the previous requirements. In our previous requirements, we have looked at requirement 1, which was giving us 5,000. Requirement 1, which was giving us 10. Requirement 2, which was giving us 5,000. Requirement 3, which was giving us y is equal to 10x plus 5,000. And then we go back to requirement 4 is giving us a total cost of 8,500. And requirement 5 is giving us a total cost of 11,000. So that's how we estimate costs. But in order to have a clear understanding on these, we can do 1 or 2 more examples. So the next example 2, we now look at example 2. Now, in example 2, we are being told we'll be doing multiple examples to enable us improve our understanding on these. The question now reads in example 2, the total cost incurred at various output levels in a factory have been measured as follows. So this represents the activity, which is the output, and that represents the total cost. Requirement, there are 2 requirements. Calculate the variable cost per unit and the fixed cost using high-low method. High-low method is just the technique that we use to calculate the variable cost per unit. Cost at highest activity minus cost at lowest activity. That is what we call high-low. Cost at highest activity minus cost at lowest activity. So requirement 1 in this example is asking us to get the variable cost per unit. In order to get the variable cost per unit, remember we have said cost at highest activity, minus cost at lowest activity. I abbreviate it as highest cost minus lowest cost, divided by highest activity minus lowest activity. But I'm stressing the point, cost of the highest activity. So highest activity is 50 and the cost is 73.10. I've not said highest cost. It is cost of highest activity. This is the highest activity and this is the lowest activity. So you pick the cost of the highest activity, which is 73.10. So 73.10 minus cost of the lowest activity is 66 divided by highest activity is 50 and lowest activity is 26. So we want to get these values. So our first value, the numerator, is 7310 minus 6566. It gives us the numerator is 744. Divided by the denominator is 50 minus 26. It gives us 24. So when we take 744 divided by 24, 744 divided by 24, it gives us 31. So the variable cost per unit is 31 per unit. That is requirement 1. Is asking us calculate the fixed cost. We follow the same procedure we had followed the other side. Fixed cost. Remember we said total cost is equals to variable cost plus fixed cost. And we said variable cost is divided into 2. Variable cost per unit and activity. You come back to your first calculation. Highest cost was 7310, lowest cost was 50. So in this case, we have the activity, was 50. 7310 is equals to our activity that we have got is 31. Our variable cost per unit is 31. So we have 31 times activity is 50 times 50 plus fixed costs. So this will give us 7310 is equals to 31 times 50. 31 times 50 is 1550 plus fixed cost. And then you make fixed cost the subject. So fixed cost will be equals to 7310 minus 1550. So our fixed cost will be 7310 you minus 1550. So it gives us 5760. So our fixed cost is 5760. If there was a third requirement, calculate number 1 variable cost per unit, number 2 fixed cost, and number 3 the equation, which was not in this question. The equation could have been y is equals to 31x plus 5760. So these could have been our equation. Y, if we were asked, we were not asked for the equation. And then maybe if we were asked to estimate the total cost of maybe producing 31 units. So if you were to produce 30, or let me look for a different figure, 32 units. If you were to produce 32 units, its y is equals to 31 times 32 plus 5760. Our last example. So let's go to our last example to see how the examiner now sets this type of a question. Now this example is application of the concept we have learned. So in our last example, remember our exams are multiple choice questions. So the question reads, the valuation department of a large firm of surveyors wishes to develop a method of predicting its total cost in a period. The following past costs have been recorded at 2 activity levels. So we have period 1 and period 2. Number of valuations, which is abbreviated with letter V, which is our activity level, and the total cost, which is abbreviated with TC. Required, the total cost model, in other words, the total cost equation or the total cost function for the period could be represented as follows. So these are our answers that we have. Now it's upon you to choose which is the right answer in multiple choice question scenario. So in this case, if we want to answer this question, our step number 1 does not always change. Our step number 1 is to get the variable cost per unit. Now we already know the drill. Variable cost per unit is cost at highest activity, which is 92.75, minus cost at lowest activity. So cost of our highest activity is 92.75. 92.75 minus cost of our lowest activity is 82,200 divided by highest activity is 515 minus lowest activity is 420. So we go for that by calculating it. 90,275 minus 82,200, it gives us a numerator of 8075 divided by 515 minus 420. It gives us 95. So what is our variable cost per unit? 8075 divided by 95, it gives us 85 per unit. So that is our variable cost. So you check on the answers. We can even use elimination method. Where there is no 85, you eliminate it. So here there is 95, 95, yet we expected 85. So we will go for answer is either A or C. But let's continue. Number 2, we need to get the fixed cost. Fixed cost. And remember we said total cost is equals to variable cost plus fixed cost. So if we use the values we have there, we have 92,275 is equals to 85 is our variable cost per unit times 515 times 515 plus fixed cost. So this gives us 90,275 is equals to 85 times 515. So 43,775 plus fixed cost. So we want to get the fixed cost. Fixed cost is equals to 90,275 minus 43,775. And that gives us a fixed cost of 90,275 minus 43,775. So it gives us a fixed cost of 46,500. And the equation is y is equals to, the equation is y is equals to 85 x plus 46,500. Remember, x was valuations, y was total cost. So total cost was the y is equals to 85 valuations plus 46,500. You'll therefore look for an equation that is closest to that. The equation that is closest to that is A. A is the closest. Total cost is 46,500. 46,500 plus 85V. It has just been rearranged. So if it was in exams, your answer will be A, which is equivalent to total cost is equals to 46,500 plus 85. The order is not important, so long as there is an addition sign between. So our answer is A. And that is how we estimate the total costs. Why is it important to do estimation? There are 4 or 3 reasons why we need to estimate costs. Number 1, it assists in estimating future expenditure. Cost estimation enables you to know how much you will spend in the next month of May or in the next month of June. Number 2, it helps to determine the net benefit anticipated. It will enable you to calculate the profit the business will generate. And number 3, it helps you to estimate the total cost to help in planning, to help in control, to help in performance evaluation, and finally, to help in decision making. In conclusion, what have we looked at? We have said that cost behavior is the reaction to cost to a given activity, decrease or remain constant. When looking at cost behavior, you need to know 4 types of costs: fixed cost, variable cost, semi-variable cost, and stepped cost. And then we have said when estimating cost, there are 4 steps involved. Step number 1, calculate the variable cost per unit. Step number 2, calculate the fixed cost. Step number 3, formulate the total cost equation. And lastly, you estimate the total cost at any given activity level. And that brings us to the end of this module, cost behavior. We will meet in our next module, which will be material costs. Our next unit, unit number 4, will be material costs. Thank you.